Okay, Raiders fans, you can calm down now. We're going to talk about you today, finally. They have been loud. They have been boisterous about them not getting any mentions on the show so far. In this very young season, mind you, we've only had a few episodes. And they're like, please talk about us. You're getting your wish today. We're going to talk about the Raiders, as well as a bunch of other teams that we haven't really hit on so far in the first 2 weeks of coverage. We're talking Panthers, we're talking Titans, we're talking Packers, we're talking a little bit more Saints. We're going to touch on everything that seems to be wrong with the Eagles, the Chargers, the Steelers, the Ravens, the Cowboys. A whole bunch of underrepresented teams are getting the spotlight today in our Week 3 preview show. EJ, my friend, how you doing?
I'm good. Week 2 was really fun. I know that a lot of fan bases didn't think it was, but from somebody that watches the entire league, the opening slate of games on Sunday was wildly entertaining. I had 8 of them up at the same time, and I would say 6.5 of them were good to the last drop. They were fantastic football. And then we've had everything since then. So we are in the thick of it. We are getting to talk about a lot of good football and a lot of teams that don't necessarily get a lot of airtime. And I think that's exciting. So I'm looking forward to it.
Speaking of not getting any airtime, by the way, it's probably prudent to start with the Cowboys because nobody ever talks about them. They're taking on the Ravens this week, who are a surprising 0-2 start by the thinnest of margins. They blew a lead against the Raiders last week, and then they lost against the Chiefs literally by a toe in week 1. So this is one of those rare 0-2 teams that you could argue should at least be 1-1 and maybe even 2-0. I think they're a lot better than their early record indicates, but they're still 0-2. And there still are reasons for that. There still are problems that they have to address. Before I let you go on your diatribe about how this team is a lot better than it seems, I do want to bring up they have 9 penalties per game. That's top 3, or I guess bottom 3, however you want to look at it, in the NFL, which is completely unacceptable. They're below average in the red zone, about 42% touchdown rate in the red zone, which is 18th-ish. But that would also be below average last year too, because in 2023, the median red zone efficiency number was like 55%. So that's not great, right? And then on top of that, Justin Tucker. Freudian slip there.
Justin the Kicker.
The Kicker. Yeah, the Kicker. Coming into like Thanksgiving of last year, a lot of people were throwing around like this is the greatest kicker of all time. And yet in the second half of last year, and especially to start this year, he's been extraordinarily unreliable, especially from distance, which was like his thing. He was the money distance kicker in this league for a long, long time. He is the only kicker in the NFL so far to miss a 50-plus yard field goal through 2 weeks, and he's missed 2 of them. So you have a team that is undisciplined, has a lot of yards, but then gets a bunch of penalties, so it's 1 step forward, 2 steps back. Not efficient in the red zone, can't make long field goals when they have these penalties that knock them out of, good red zone opportunities. Despite all that, they've still been very close to winning these games, but that's kind of the reason why they haven't, is because they still they can't get it together when it comes to situational football and capitalizing on the opportunities that they're given.
It is hard to win in the NFL, and the Ravens are poster children for that in this early season, being at 0-2, having played pretty well, but I would argue not well enough to win. Ravens offense leading the league in yards per game, but those are pretty much empty calories. It doesn't mean they're the best. They're 14th in points per game, 12th in TDs, 13th in EPA per play, and 12th in pass yards per play. So they're in the middle of the pack. Again, not bad. They could have easily won these last 2 games, but as often happens in the NFL, it comes down to details, whether or not you make the kick, whether or not you can be disciplined in the fourth quarter, whether or not you can make less mistakes in general than your opponent. And the Ravens have not been great at that yet, which I'm sure is infuriating Harbaugh because he is a stickler for those things and likes to produce teams in an image that are not like that. And yet here we are. The offensive line is protecting pretty well, but some of that, again, is smoke and mirrors because it's Lamar's legs. He's a magician. I've said it for 2 straight weeks. I've said it for many straight years. He will get out of more sacks than the offensive line lets through. That's for sure. And it leads to a really long time to throw, 6th longest in the league, because he's scrambling around looking to make things happen after rushers have gotten by their blockers. So again, when you look at their protection stats, you might go, oh, they're great. They have plenty of time to throw. Yeah, they have a long time to throw, but Lamar's creating a lot of that. Giving Micah that much time is problematic. He's one of the few athletes in the league that can run with Lamar in terms of pass rushers. And that could come back to bite them in ways that it hasn't in the first couple of weeks. Add in a physical set of corners for Dallas, who love to pressure receivers that don't generate a lot of separation outside of Zay. Zay has been doing a great job getting free this year, but the rest of those receivers and tight ends are not necessarily separation artists. Could be a rough day in the passing game. We talked about this last week with Minnesota, that it's just kind of a matchup that you don't really like. That, the Ravens have been passing more than they've been running this year. They've got 78 passes to 59 runs. That's, again, the Todd Monken influence. They might have to, for lack of a better term, revert this week and go back to a run game because Dallas struggled against it. And hey, you got Derrick Henry on the roster. If there was ever a time to get him rolling, seems like this might be the week in terms of positive matchups to say, hey, go smash that front a little bit and see if you can make some yards, because if we return to our sort of heyday play, we've got a chance in this game. If we try and sort of just stay the course and even out our inefficiencies in the pass game, we might run up against an immovable object here.
The run game in particular is something they have to get going. And they've been okay. They've churned. If we're looking at like just running back carries, they're getting, 4.1 a pop. Lamar has obviously been the more explosive option for them on the ground, but a lot of that's more scrambles than designed runs. They haven't done as many design runs this year as it's just like Lamar creating something on a pass play. But as far as their running back room, they only have 3 explosive runs in 2 games, which is, for comparison, tied with Carolina. So they really have to get Henry going, because that's like, you have one of the most explosive backs in the history of the NFL. And I know he has a reputation for like taking a while to get going, but he's also somebody who is known for ripping off huge chunks if you can kind of get him going on that track. So that's something I think that they should focus on this week, especially after looking at the Cowboys film from last week against the Saints, where, and we'll get into the Saints a little bit more, but as good as the Saints offensive line was, the Cowboys defensive front was awful against the run last week. And this is something that we've seen repeatedly, regardless of who the coordinator is. This personnel for Dallas, which is, let's say it's underweight. They're kind of built more for speed and penetration, everything like that, but they can get pushed around. And so if you can get to their front side shoulder on these combos, they're not really going to fight back against it. Again, they're really more built for penetration and trying to force an early cutback. But if you stop them from doing that, they can get pushed back. And the Saints just absolutely mauled them in the run game because they're not really built to stand there and box with you. So I would say, if I'm Baltimore, I'm just going to try to copy as much as I can from what New Orleans did last week. Rely on the run game, rely on Henry, use a lot of condensed formations because you want these corners to be backed off with outside leverage. It's going to open up all that stuff over the middle. This is a defense that historically, just, again, no matter who the coordinator is, just can't really handle the pass game in between the numbers. It's just something about it. Like, their linebackers have never really been great in terms of shutting that down, and especially with Eric Kendricks being as old as he is. So I'm not predicting the Ravens are going to do that, but I do think that they should, because you saw what happened with New Orleans last week. It was hot knife through butter.
Yeah, it's a fascinating schematic sort of matchup based on what we thought we were going to see in the preseason and what we've seen through the first 2 weeks. This might be one of the games that's the most different when viewed through those 2 lenses. We might see a running battle shaping up, and if that's the case, I think this game, even on the road, probably leans towards the Ravens.
Before we get to the next game, by the way, I do want to mention, if you're already on Underdog and you already play on Underdog, check your lobby right now, because as of today, there is a CD Lamb free pick. So if you think CD is getting at least half a yard in this game, which he should, because he's CD Lamb, that is available for you in your lobby right now. And if you're not already on Underdog, you also get an additional new customer free pick that you can use for this week, which is Patrick Mahomes. So while you're doing your pick'ems, make sure to use those to your advantage, because it'll make it a lot easier for you to get your payouts, obviously. Also, one last note, we're building a pick'em slip out of every single game that we cover today, because we're covering 5 games. And even though we are recording this on a Wednesday, about midday, so we don't have every number available to us, they did give us Zay Flowers at 54.5 receiving, which, if you heard us talk about how the Saints attacked this team last week, again, breaking all that man coverage, which Dallas tends to rely on because they have a bunch of good man corners, abusing those crossing routes, abusing alignment, abusing motion to kind of back them off and keep them from playing press coverage. I do think there's a world where Baltimore exploits that with Zay, who very clearly is their best receiver, and gets him at least 54.5. So our first entry on this week's Pick'em, Zay Flowers, 54.5 receiving. Again, if you want to check that out on Underdog Fantasy, use promo code BOOTLEG. You'll get up to $1,000 in deposit bonuses and those free picks that we mentioned before, Pat Mahomes and CD Lamb for this week. Now, game number 2. Chargers Steelers. I think Steelers fans have actually wanted us to avoid talking about them because it's so very typical Steelers to start the year, which is shaky offense, some fun plays here and there to George Pickens, and then TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith saving the day and them ending up at 2-0 despite really not being super fun games to watch, and yet they just keep winning. Stop me if you've heard this before over the last 15 years. So the Steelers are still the Steelers. Shocker. They're going up against the Chargers this week, who are very unlike the Chargers that we're used to. Fascinating matchup. EJ, where do you stand on it to start us off?
It feels like this is one of the sneaky best games of the week because it's a clash of two teams that are both running a style that is similar, that is not the NFL norm. This is kind of against the current NFL meta. And that to me makes it wildly interesting as a guy who analyzes football and watches a lot of football to say, okay, here's two teams that are zigging when everybody else is zagging. And they do it much the same way. How's this going to work out when they come up against each other? Both teams have very athletic passers who are not currently asked to do very much in the passing game. Their current stat lines are ridiculously similar. Herbert has 46 attempts and 31 completions. Fields has 43 attempts and 30 completions. And you go all the way down the line, and a lot of their stats are incredibly similar. Time to throw for Justin Herbert, 2.86. Time for Justin Fields, 2.90. And it's just a sort of study in what typically would have been contrast between Herbert's numbers and Justin Fields' numbers, and now they look eerily similar. So the blueprint for both teams is really the same. Control the ball, play good defense, run the rock, and make less mistakes than the other team. Be disciplined. Both very experienced coaches, both build physical teams. Like, that is a cornerstone of their ethos on how to put together a football team is we are going to be tough. Tomlin's been that way forever. Harbaugh has been that way in every stop that he's had on the coaching line. The outcome's going to come down to execution. We talked about that, and probably the kicking game. You famously put out a kicking video this week, so I'm sure that'll blow that all to hell. But the Chargers ground game is currently clearly superior. Second in yards, in rush yards per game, fourth in rush yards per play. The Steelers, respectively, are 12th and 28th. So I'd lean the Chargers' way that way. But the Steelers have a wild card. One George Pickens, you mentioned him in the intro. He's been playing extremely well, given limited opportunities in your early season. He had some nice, clean wins versus Pat Surtain. And again, not looking at volume, but if you can cleanly break off routes against Patrick Surtain, you're doing really well. Say what you want about the separation data. There's been a lot of talk about that now that it's more readily available and there are multiple sources. And some people say trust it, some people don't. Depends on where you look as to the data you see. But he's near the top of all of those charts. So that's a pretty good sign that he's doing better than average in terms of the NFL, let's just say, median of getting away from folks. All signs are pointing up to him. He's lost over 100 yards being negated by penalties on the offense. So as good as his numbers
theoretically be like the most productive receiver in the NFL right now, if it wasn't for penalties. Like, Steelers fans, and that was part of the reason that was so frustrating watching that game, is like, it should have not been close, or at least not as close, right? Like, it should have been a blowout. That game should have been over by halftime, but just the penalties and the taking the sack fumbles away from Watt early in the season, it's just unreal. Like, they have like the anti-Chiefs ref magic over there. I don't get it, man.
Bill Barnwell did a great piece on that if you're interested in it, by the way. But as far as Pickens is concerned, we're talking about a game that we think is going to be very physical, very evenly matched, very run first, very sort of risk averse in the passing game. But Pickens has the ability to make that one big, shining, game-changing play down the field. And he's been doing it at a relatively solid rate throughout the early season. And I don't love the Chargers' answers for him. The outside corners in Samuel Jr. and Fulton, or the deep safety Gilman matched up against Pickens. I'll take Pickens in any one of those three matchups. So no matter where they put him, in the slot against the deep safety or on the outside corners, he's going to beat all those folks because none of them are the equal of Patrick Surtain. So if you're looking for sort of one shining hope in how the Steelers could break this one open, I would look directly at one George Pickens.
On the other side, you touched on the Chargers having a top 2 run game, but if we're just looking at running back production, we take quarterbacks out of it, because that can be something that either inflates or deflates a run game and how it's perceived. If we're just looking at running back production, they're number 1. And it's not particularly close. They're getting 187 running back rushing yards per game.
We told you all offseason. We told you that the Chargers were telling you what they were going to do. And here they are, and they are doing it to the letter.
The Joe Alt pick is obviously working. He's allowed 2 pressures in 2 weeks. Rashawn Slater on the other side has allowed 1 pressure in 2 weeks. Now, yeah, they don't throw the ball that much, but like that's still a pretty obscenely low pressure allowed rate when you have other tackles that are allowing 6 to 7 per week, and you're getting 1 allowed by your rookie right tackle against Max Crosby. Like, that's pretty nuts. And I understand TJ Watt is also a huge test. So was Max, and he passed the Max test. I would say TJ Watt and Max are on the same tier of edge rusher. So if he passes the TJ Watt test, there's nobody in the league that I wouldn't trust Joe Alt against, because that's 2 out of the best 5 guys, right? So they have an elite tackle tandem. They run the shit out of the ball. Justin Herbert doesn't have to do a whole lot, but if there's a situation where they need him to, he's obviously more than capable of doing it. Ladd McConkey is coming along. Even Quentin Johnston's made some plays, which did not have that on my bingo card. Plus, you have a defense that's played extraordinarily well too, because their edge rush rotation is super deep, and they have some DBs that are really aggressive and they tackle well in space. So, like, this is a mostly complete team. Like, the one thing they're missing is a George Pickens, honestly. but other than that, like, this is a mostly complete team. I wouldn't be surprised if Carolina turns into a fire sale type situation, if maybe they make a play for Deontay Johnson, if they want to go on a run here, but not that they really have to. The one concern that I kind of have for the Chargers in this matchup specifically, if you're looking at the Steelers' run defense, when they gave up explosives to Atlanta, it was outside, right? It was a jet sweep. It was a pin and pull. It was one outside zone run where Keanu Benton tried to backdoor it and just didn't get there. So it was kind of more on Benton than anything else. If you try to run inside on them, inside zone, duo, they allow 1.0 and 1.7 yards per carry, respectively, on those 2 run concepts. Guess what? The Chargers run a lot, those 2 things. So it's kind of strength on strength here. Whoever wins that battle in terms of interior O-line versus interior D-line, that's probably going to determine who wins the game, especially if, Pittsburgh stops the run and gets a big day from George Pickens. Like that's probably going to determine who wins it. But I couldn't tell you who is going to win that battle right now, because these are two really, really tough physical teams that kind of do whatever they want to, even though it's coming. And in a way, those are the most fun games to watch, because it's not really complicated. It's just, okay, let's watch these two guys fight, and whoever wins is going to be plainly obvious by halftime.
Both teams have set it up that way. Both coaches have set it up that way. Again, if you watched any of our offseason content about the Chargers from the draft all the way forward, we said, they keep telling you better believe them. Like every chance they get to come to the podium, every pick they make, all the free agency acquisitions, they're all pointing in the same direction. They are going to run the rock. Bringing in Greg Roman, everybody's like, and it's like, well, that's again right down the middle in terms of the strategy they're laying out, and they have not deviated. If anything, they might be the most honest team in the NFL in terms of this is what we're going to do, and here we are doing it. Told you. And it'll be a fascinating matchup to see who's better at it, because Pittsburgh, again, has been doing this forever, for a very long time. And the Chargers are new to it, but not bad at it. In fact, they might even be better than the Steelers at it. So we'll know a lot more about that after Sunday, and it'll be a fascinating watch.
This game's addition to the underdog entry for today's preview show, by the way, is Justin Herbert at higher than 199.5 passing. It's not often you see a top 10 quarterback in the NFL be sub 200 in terms of passing expectation, but they just run the ball so much that I don't really blame underdog for doing that. However, the reason why I took higher is because, let's say Pittsburgh does bow up and stop the run, LA's going to have to throw the ball. And they're not particularly built to do that, like if they have to, but I'm going to have faith in Justin Herbert of all quarterbacks getting over 200 passing yards. So again, it's not like the cleanest entry so far, but if I had to pick something from this game, that's the one that I kind of feel the best about, because there's worse things to put your faith in than Justin Herbert. All right, next game on the docket. We mentioned the Saints earlier. Eagles Saints. Before I get to talking about that Saints offense, again, got to talk about the Eagles defense. There are some criticisms that I think are accurate. There are some criticisms that I think require a little bit more context. People are bringing up like, okay, they spent all this money on Bryce Huff, and they spent these picks on Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis, and like, how is their pass rush, and Nolan Smith obviously as well, how is their pass rush like this quote unquote bad? I don't necessarily think it's bad. It's just they don't finish. They're top 7 among all edge and interior defensive line groups in terms of pressure percentage. Like, they're getting pressure. They're not finishing it. And for a D-line group to have 34 pressures in 2 games, but only 2 sacks in 2 games among that group, that's just, it's unacceptable, right? Like, you have to finish. You have to get there, especially when, they put that many assets into that group. Like, they pay those guys to finish the job, especially against a 36-year-old quarterback coming off Achilles. So that is the problem, but it's also not the problem. You got rookie corners out there that are like fighting for their life, and it's 3.5 seconds into the play, and Kirk Cousins is still delivering the ball. Like, there's a lot of issues that I think just go back to the fact that the Eagles' defensive line is not capitalizing on the opportunities they're actually being given to get the quarterback on the ground. Secondarily, this one really grinds my gears. If you actually want to criticize the Eagles' defense with something that has a lot more substance to it, it's alignment and it's run defense. I don't understand why, like in terms of defensive structure and philosophy and all that kind of stuff, I don't understand why you have either Milton Williams or Moro Ojomo, who are both about 290 pounds. Milton Williams might be like 287, like 290 might be slightly generous for him. and having them play a quasi nose tackle role as a 2-eye when they're in all these flex fronts, when they're in their nickel package, right? Because when they're in nickel, they have a 2-eye, they have a 3 technique, and then they have 2 edge players and 2 linebackers, right? Why is Jordan Davis not on the field? When you're in a nickel package against a team that is running the ball all over you, like, why are you even exposing yourself to have somebody who is under 300 pounds have to take on double teams, have to put a dent in the offensive line, have to stop these combos from getting to the second level? Like, why are you doing that? People say, oh, Jordan Davis can't stop the run. Jordan Davis wasn't on the field for like a third of their explosive runs. I think Vic Fangio should rightly be criticized for how he used personnel in that game because, like, theoretically, the guy most suited on the roster to play nose tackle wasn't playing nose tackle for them, even though that's what he and Jalen Carter did at Georgia, where you had Jordan Davis as a 2-eye, you had Jalen Carter as a 3, and they were both strong enough that they could swap, right? So anytime New Orleans would get Jalen Carter as a 3, they're like, okay, let's just run it at the 290-pound guy and go outside zone weak. And they did that. Also, secondarily, Jalen Carter, Lindstrom had him in hell yesterday because he would pass him off to the right tackle. The right tackle would kind of just ever so slightly, displace him up the field. Then Lindstrom was like, I'm going to go cut block somebody like freaking juggernaut out here. And he was hitting all these cut blocks in space that you wouldn't believe because he's so good at it. So Lindstrom played his ass off. Ironically, the only Eagles defensive tackle I thought got the best of Lindstrom was Thomas Booker, friend of the show. All that to say, Vic Fangio didn't use his personnel in the correct roles, in my opinion. The pass rush couldn't finish the rushes they were actually getting. They're putting all this stress on young corners to get the job done. And that's not a recipe for success, especially against an offense as explosive as New Orleans, or at least the offense that we now know is as explosive as New Orleans. So there's a lot of blame to go around. I just wanted to add that context to it because, like, the idea of criticizing the Eagles defense is correct. I just want to make sure we're doing it in the right way.
Eagles fans are going to learn that Vic Fangio is many things, and one of them is stubborn. He is set in his principles and ways of running his defense and believes after all these years that he knows best. And he is not a guy that's going to waver from that. He has not wavered from that at previous stops. And we saw it not only in the alignment issues that you said popped up, but we also saw it at the end of the game. That defense, that sequence looked so grindingly familiar to me. I was like, oh, here we go. It's Vic Fangio, quote unquote, prevent. Doesn't really prevent any. Oh, big chunk. Oh, big chunk. Oh, big chunk. Oh, adjust. No, not going to adjust. And I was like, what? Oh, yeah, right. Vic, he's not going to. Okay, cool. He's going to play the way that he wants to. He's going to play the guys he wants to, who he believes have bought in. And I don't think any tide is going to turn him from that sort of path forward, because that's been his path. He's stayed on it. He's been very successful doing it, but there are those things. And certainly the end of the game drive was one of those things that reminded me, oh yeah, Vic's going to do it the way Vic's going to do it. This offensive upgrade from moving on from Pete Carmichael to Clint Kubiak is one of the most impactful in the entire league. The Saints offense had some hidden flashes last year, and people like Mina Kimes brought that up. It was buried in some inconsistency and inability to sort of string drives together. But let me give you Derek Carr's numbers coming into the Dallas game. So this doesn't even include what he did to the Cowboys. So this is the last, I forget, it's either 10 or 12 games of Derek Carr coming into the Cowboys game. 69.8 completion percentage, 3,200 yards, 21 touchdowns to only 2 picks, 108.6 passer rating, 7.95 yards per attempt, and 268 yards per game. And again, those numbers do not include the Cowboys game. So he has been doing this for a while, and it was kind of shrouded in all the other stuff that they couldn't get out of the way of. Well, Kubiak comes in, cleans up that inefficiency, scrapes it away, modernizes the attack, leans heavily into play action, and everything's working. They are now a threshing machine on the ground and through the air. Literally everything they tried against the Cowboys worked. They lead the league in EPA per play, yards per pass play, and this is the one that gets me. At 10.5 yards a pass play, they are over 2 full yards ahead of the next best team, the number 2 team in the league.
At what point in the game? I think it was like midway through the second quarter. It might have been later in the second quarter against the Cowboys. Carr's YPA was like 20.2. It was just absurd. It's crazy. Yeah.
So the next best team, the 30, let's just say the second best team in the league, is 8.3 yards. And again, the Saints are at 10.5, over 2 full yards ahead. That kind of gap at the top of the standings is not something you see really in any statistical category. They have been dominant. They've also allowed the fewest QB pressures in the league at 11, and that leans into the offensive line and the remakes there, which Kubiak is definitely benefiting from. And Fuaga at left tackle has been a bit of a revelation. I had him as my top guard because the one thing that he struggled with at Oregon State was outside speed. And then the Saints put him at left tackle, not right, not the position he played in college. And I went, oh God, they're putting him in the highest leverage spot possible. He is going to see the most speed he's ever seen. This isn't going to, oh, he's fine. Oh, wait, he's played against some of the best speed rushers in the league in 2 weeks, and he's been absolutely fine. Of course, dominant as a run blocker. There was never a question about that. The Saints offensive line right now is rolling, and because of that, very little pressure for Carr. He's free to operate. Big rush lanes for Alvin Kamara. He looks like the Alvin Kamara of 5 years ago. This is an offense that is really, really pushing people. Now, on the other side, the Saints defense has been tough against the run, but it has had to see a lot of it because they've jumped out to early leads so often. Teams haven't been running. The Cowboys had no chance to run. They were down 3 scores in the first quarter. You're not going to run against that a lot. So this week's test against, again, the very good Eagles offensive line and Saquon plus Jalen starting to run is certainly the strongest test that we've seen for the Saints run defense yet. We're going to know a lot more about this defense's ability to squash the run after this week that we really haven't seen through the first 2 weeks, largely because of their opponent and the fact that their offense has been scoring like gangbusters. So going to be an interesting game to see how it balances out. We'll know a little bit more about these Saints in terms of quote unquote how real they are on the defensive side of the ball, but on offense, I've seen just about what I need to see to say the Saints are here. They're for real. They're one of the most fun offenses to watch in the league right now, and I'm all for it.
You brought up that they only allowed 11 pressures. That includes Trevor Penning, by the way, who talk about.
Yes, it does.
A rebound. My God.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's played. I mean, particularly as a run blocker, pass protection, they've protected him from pass protection, I think, which has clearly been his weakness early on in his career. But as a run blocker, he's been great. Ruiz has been awesome. Eric McCoy's been phenomenal. Lucas Patrick. Shout out Lucas Patrick. And you see the difference between him on the Bears with, let's just say, lesser offensive line coaching to in New Orleans under Doug Marrone, and the way he's playing. He's played like the best left guard in football through 2 weeks. And then Fuaga as well, switching sides and being a dominant left tackle so far. Saints offensive line's been great. All credit to Doug Marrone. All credit to obviously the individual players too, because Penning had to put in a lot of work to get to this point. We were worried about, okay, is the Ramczyk thing going to sink this offense? And so far the answer is no. I want to touch a little bit on the Saints defense too, by the way. If you look at this DB room with especially like a Debo, Taylor, Kool-Aid McKinstry, Marshawn when he's healthy, which he did practice today with that hammy. I don't know when he's going to be back, but he did practice today. But regardless, if you look at all these DBs, it's a very deep corner room, and they are physical. They are aggressive. They beat the crap out of receivers at the line of scrimmage. And that could be an issue for Philly because their answer to those types of corners was A.J. Brown, who's bigger and stronger and tougher and meaner than everybody else. And it's like, oh, you want to fight? Okay, fight him. They don't have him because he's dealing with an injury too. So in the absence of A.J. Brown against a very tough physical secondary and an extraordinarily physical front seven, especially with linebackers like Pete Werner and Demario Davis that destroy run games as well. I don't see a good matchup here for Philly. And I kind of feel like that loss against Atlanta, that very preventable loss against Atlanta, is going to come back to bite them in the ass, because this type of game is one that I don't think they're going to have a good shot of winning. And they really, especially early in the year, they really needed to win the games that they had in the palm of their hand, like the Falcons game. You stack that loss on top of a potential loss to New Orleans, on top of their remaining schedule, things could get out of hand kind of quickly here in Philly. And I want people to be aware that it's a lot more tenuous there than maybe it seems.
And I think a lot of people in the offseason, as they went through the schedule, which is always a dangerous exercise in the summertime because we know teams change dramatically. In fact, Jason Kelsey, who was in the booth for part of the Eagles game, was saying, hey, this isn't the team we had last year. This is a very different team. And that's the same for every team across the NFL. So as fans sort of go through and go, oh, Saints, that's a winnable game. They were sort of struggling down the stretch. We got them. You're going to see a game that's going to be very tightly contested, and I think may even lean more towards the Saints than it does the Eagles right now. And that's an NFC power shift that very few people, including us, saw coming. If it comes to pass that New Orleans does win this game and puts it on Philly, I think you're going to see perceptions about the Saints change pretty rapidly. Because, again, people can look back and say, oh, well, they won against that team in week 1. They really took the Cowboys apart in week 2, and that opened some eyes. But, again, the Cowboys famously have had, when the Cowboys' weaknesses stack up, they seem to stack up all at once, and it snowballs, and they lose badly. We saw that in the playoffs last year. So I think some people are still kind of on the fence about New Orleans. But if they take it to Philly straight up and beat them, I think the conversation around New Orleans will change substantively and for the rest of the season.
Now, our contribution from this game to the underdog entry, I don't want to say it's a coward pick, but it is kind of a cowardly pick. Alvin Kamara at higher than half of a rushing or receiving touchdown. I didn't really see anything else that I loved here, and so I just kind of defaulted to the easy thing of like, oh, let's take the really good running back behind the really good offensive line against the very porous run defense. So Alvin Kamara, stunner, I know, higher than half of a touchdown. Now, fourth game on the docket, Packers Titans. These are two teams that we have yet to really talk about so far this season beyond a passing mention. The Titans are both better and worse than I thought they would be to start the year. They're better in the sense that they should be 2-0, and I think the team itself has performed pretty well. Some would even say above expectations, right? The defense has been suffocating at times. Tony Pollard's had some, resurgent looks here and there. Like, he looks to have a lot more juice back now than he did last year. And yet they've started 0-2 because Will Levis just cannot resist the masculine urge to give away a football game in the red zone. So I don't really know what to make of this team, because until Will Levis stops doing stupid shit, I'm just going to keep pegging them for a loss. But at the same time, I recognize the rest of the team is good enough to win this game. So it's a tough one to call from that standpoint.
Yeah, this is an interesting intersection between two teams, like you said, that we haven't sort of shown the spotlight on directly yet this year. But given the timing, I love it, because Matt LaFleur's game plan for Malik Willis's first start as a Packer was a masterpiece. I gave him his flowers on Twitter. He deserves them. That thing should be put in a case and studied as a single game effort based on a particular situation of where your team is. LaFleur did it masterfully. It was gorgeous. I don't have another adjective for that. Strangely enough, where the intersection occurs is Brian Callahan would do really well to copy a lot of the elements that LaFleur used to take some of the up and down out of Will Levis's game. Because again, Malik Willis has high flashes and then crazy lows of what are you doing and who does that sound like? Everybody that I texted and DM'd during the Titans game was, Oh yeah, sounds like a typical Will Levis game going off. And I was like, oh man, when that's the book already on a young quarterback, Brian Callahan could do a lot of good for himself by looking across the field at his counterpart and going, hey, what did he do to isolate that young quarterback from mistakes and pull some of those elements into his game plan? Because again, Levis has had some very high highs. Some of the balls that he has ripped into tight coverage this year are breathtaking. And some of the stupidity he's displayed in high leverage situations, giving away the football, also breathtaking. So it's super confounding. I'm with you that it does feel like this team's going to go as far as Levis allows them to go or Levis takes them. And you sort of have to take some of the rein out of his hand and say, we're going to give you a bunch of this. But again, we're going to put you in low leverage spots that we expect you to hit. And then we're not going to lean on you to basically have the entire playbook and run the whole thing because you haven't shown the ability to do that well enough to keep us in the game. So we're going to, we're not going to take the air out of the ball, but we're going to take it out of your hands in some of the higher leverage situations. And LaFleur did a masterful job of that last week. So that might isolate them from some of the bumps. The Titans interior is going to be tough to run on. 10th fewest rushing yards allowed per game through 2 weeks. The pass defense could use some additional rush. They're 24th in QB pressure rate. But given how well the Packers line protects, 7th best in QB percentage pressure allowed, I'd expect to see a little bit more quick passing game mixed in from Green Bay to supplement the run game, which could be tough sledding if they try and go through the middle. Again, outside, they might have some success against Tennessee, but they're going to have a little bit of something else. And I think LaFleur's going to open that playbook up a little bit for Malik Willis, either to have more quarterback run game, which I'd love to see because Willis is a great athlete, but also some of that quick screen game that other teams use to sort of replicate run game when you're not having any success against Simmons and Sweat in the middle of that line.
The battle that I'm really focused on here the most is run game philosophy for Green Bay with a mobile quarterback in Malik, who they did feature in the run game last week, and who also can make stuff happen with his legs on scrambles and stuff like that too. Keep in mind, this team had 10 explosive runs last week, which is nuts. So run game philosophy for Green Bay that kind of spreads out the runs between running back, quarterback, and even at times receiver versus how aggressive I think the Titans want to be in their run defense philosophy. And it's kind of a catch-22 a little bit, because if you look at how Matt LaFleur structured the run game last week, it was, outside zone, outside zone, outside zone, and then we're going to call something funky, like really funky, and get an explosive run off of it. Now, they did run the ball like 53 times, so of course you want to get 10 explosive runs, but that's still a pretty high explosive run percentage, even for 53 carries. And it was stuff like, okay, we're going to line up in the pistol and we're going to run like a fake pistol power. And then the right side of the offensive line that's like pretending to down block on power is just going to run straight past the linebackers, and they're going to end up as lead blockers in space for an end around to Bo Melton going the other way. The tight end's going to jab inside, and then he's going to be a lead blocker. Just really crazy stuff like that you literally can't practice for. Like, you're not practicing for that play. It's batshit insane, right? And then you had a bunch of counter. You had pin and pulls. They ran it from pistol. They ran it from the gun. They were giving all these weird angles. And the reason why the Packers were doing that stuff, prioritizing down blocking and pullers and creating these just crazy wide, aggressive seams, was because they wanted to slow down penetration. They wanted to punish the penetration that typically is what is used to stop the outside zone run game, right? Because if you penetrate, especially to the front side of outside zone, you force an early cutback before that cutback lane develops. That's how you stop it. That's been the way that you stop it forever. If you stack the line of scrimmage with bodies, if you're running a 5-man service, sometimes a 6-man service, and you're doing that to force early cutbacks, the way you punish that is with counter. You punish it with power. You punish it with pin and pulls. And you use that penetration to basically set up the block. You pin them to where they penetrated into. You pin them there, and then the ball's going the other way behind a pulling blocker. So you use the aggression to create the seams, right? So that's what Green Bay was doing, was outside zone, outside zone, outside zone. And then we're going to pin you there when you finally crack and you start just getting overly aggressive. And then we're going to hit you with the explosive. I think, it's a theory, I think they do that so that they can slow down the defensive line to make the outside zone run game hit better. Now, how the Titans can stop that, or at least slow it down themselves, is by being even more aggressive, but in a different way. It has to be controlled aggression, because there is a tell in these types of runs. If you go back and you watch all 53 of them for Green Bay, wherever the tight ends were was a pretty good indicator of where the ball was going, right? So if you were seeing a Y tight end on the line of scrimmage, or like a YY wing, like two tight ends on the line of scrimmage in a wing look, the ball was probably going that direction, especially if it was in the gun. You know, they're one of the teams that I think actually does a pretty good job of running outside zone from the gun, even though it's kind of a weird path for the running back. Like, they make it work, right? So if the tight end is on, that's a decent indicator of where the ball is going. If the tight end is off, now you're expecting him to go across the back of the offensive line and either be a puller or a sift blocker, and you expect the ball to go that way. So how I kind of think the Titans might play it, because they're another one of these teams that has that Ravens DNA of we stop the run through blitzing, we stop the run through aggression, is find the tight end, whether he's on, whether he's off, and then we're going to call our blitzes based on that, and we're going to hope we get lucky, right? Because if you're running Ernest Jones off the back hip of a defensive end, you know, like let's say tight end's off and we think he's going to be coming across as a puller. If we're running Ernest Jones off that back hip at the defensive end, we can either A, get him into that hole before it's remotely ready and he'll just sit there and say, "Hi, how you doing?" to the running back. Or B, if he gets there really quickly, he can disrupt the puller, and then the running back is going to have nowhere to go and he's going to have to bounce into something that doesn't exist, and maybe we get a TFL that way. So all that to say, the Packers structure their run game in a way to punish aggression, but I think there is a way to still be aggressive and still punish the Packers. I don't know what's going to happen. I really don't know what's going to happen, because you have a game between Malik Willis and Will Levis. So at the end of the day, like, that's going to matter. But if the Packers run game works against Tennessee like it worked last week, that might be the only way that neither of these quarterbacks matter, because the Packers are going to be on the field so damn long because they're running it so much. I know that's a long way to go for a short drink of water, but I just wanted to explain my thought process on it, because this Packers offense is very unique under Malik Willis, and I think unique offenses have to be attacked in unique ways.
The more they force the ball into Will Levis's hands as a Green Bay defense, the Green Bay defense has been really good this year. So I like that matchup less. Again, they've had some success running. That's Tennessee. But the Green Bay defense hasn't been terrible against the run. So if they're able to kind of sell out early, which is a classic defensive game plan, we're going to sell out against the thing that's easy, the run. We're going to make sure you can't do that. We're going to force your young quarterback to throw it 35, 40, 45 times. That matchup starts to lean heavily towards Green Bay for me.
Now, my entry addition into our underdog pick'em for this game, again, call me a bitch. I'm playing it conservative. I went Josh Jacobs lower than 14.5 for his longest rush, right? I am betting that they're not going to pop the same number of explosives in this game as they did in last game. I still think he's going to get a bunch of yards. His total is at like 74 rushing yards, which I was like, I still think he's going to get more than that. But I think it's going to be more in like 4 to 8 yard chunks and nothing 15 plus. So give me Josh Jacobs lower than 14.5, which of course means on the opening drive, he's getting 1 for 20, knowing my luck.
I'm going to say roll the dice, Coleman. I always love it when you roll these slips out, because just to let the folks at home know and have a little peek behind the curtain. I don't get to see these before we record, so I'm finding out about them at the same time you are. Some of them I'm like, oh, that has no chance to hit. And that one has some chance to hit, but also Josh Jacobs has been running the ball really, really well and has been, I think, quite pleased with his decision to land in Green Bay in the offseason with the offensive line he has in front of him. And he's paid off some, I would say, even some pretty average blocks with some sort of vintage Josh Jacobs stuff that I have always been a fan of the style with which he runs the football, and he's gotten to show that off a couple of times in the first couple of weeks. So that one I feel a little tenuous about.
Speaking of vintage Josh Jacobs, by the way, let's talk about his former team now. Finally, we made Raiders fans wait for it.
We did.
They are coming off of a great week 2 victory in Baltimore. They were like 9.5-point dogs, and they were down and still, pulled it off. Huge win for Antonio Pierce. I think it's clear that building loves him. They play their asses off for him. There's still some holes on the roster, but like, you can lose games. You can't lose the locker room. I don't think he's ever going to lose that locker room. Like, they love him there. And I think they made the right decision to hire him. Looking ahead to this matchup against the Panthers, considering how tough the Raiders played the Chargers in week 1, and we think the Chargers are a good team, and considering, the Herculean effort they did to pull off that win in Baltimore, I would be stunned, like flat out stunned, if the Panthers won this game. Not just because the Panthers are bad. I think the Raiders are legitimately good. And you're looking at that AFC West with the Chiefs, who are the Chiefs, the Chargers, who are good, the Broncos, who have a ways to go. Like, we could be looking at 3 playoff teams from the AFC West. If the Raiders keep playing like this, like, that's a sneaky 7 seed there, because they have a really tough, aggressive defense. They have Devontae Adams. They have Gardner Minshew not turning the ball over. He only has 2 turnover-worthy plays in 2 weeks. They're plucky. They're feisty. They're not easy to beat. And I got to say, like, not that I had like horrible expectations for the Raiders this year, but they're exceeding the ones that I had.
They're doing really well, and they're playing the type of complementary football that they had to walk the path they laid out in the offseason. If you're going to say, nope, Minshew's our quarterback, he has to play more like Baker Mayfield did last year and not be bad Gardner, because Gardner has seen a lot of interceptable throws that he likes in his career, and he will chuck it up there. But if he can control that urge and play within himself more often, then it plays into the way that you've built the defense and the way you, again, have to play as a team. And they're doing that right now. Taking down the Ravens in a game where you were road dogs is a sizable accomplishment. I don't care who you are or at what point we are within the season. For the Raiders to do it this early and do it in the way that they did it is very, very impressive as a team accomplishment. Crosby was a menace again with 2 sacks. Through 2 weeks, he has 10 stops, though, making him the top edge defender in that category. He's 21st overall in the NFL for stops. That is another way that he's impacting the game when he is being doubled or when he is not getting pressure, because he is not among the top 10, certainly not among the top 15 in pressures created. He's like 16th or 18th. He's still doing very, very well. Raiders fans, don't get on me. He is rushing the passer just fine. But in, I think, a very Max Crosby way, he is contributing in every way across that front and wrecking game plans. You best not run at him because, again, one of the very best in the league right now at stopping the run from the edge position. If I'm Andy Dalton, I am not looking forward to making my first start against this defensive line because they are aggressive. They play really hard. Add to that the trio of Raiders DBs. Now, I've had a bunch of people reach out to me, not only to say, talk about the Raiders, but talk about that Raiders secondary. I'd like to for a second. Hobbs, Jones, and Bennett, who've been targeted 19 times. They've only allowed 8 receptions for 96 yards in 2 weeks combined, and their collective passer rating allowed is under 50. These guys are playing very fast, very aggressive football, and again, sort of It's that synchronicity with the front. The front is providing pressure. They don't have to stay in coverage as long. They can keep those windows a little closer, a little shorter, be closer to the point of contact when the ball arrives, play through the catch point. They're doing all that, and they're playing it with attitude that would make Raiders greats proud. They have a strong lineage of DBs.
You can say it. They play like assholes, but they're supposed to. They're Raiders DBs. They're aggressive. What do you want?
Yeah, they're being asked to by their head coach, and they're doing it really, really well. So right now, again, the combination, not only between the offense and the defense and really, the whole team in coaching, but even the front of the defense and the back of the defense are playing the way they need to support each other. And that's why I think we're seeing results that were maybe a little bit greater in the early season than what we predicted.
I do want to touch a little bit more on the aggression of this defense, by the way, because yes, obviously they're tough and they're physical and they hit hard and all the Antonio Pierce, Patrick Graham stuff. But I'm talking like philosophy, the aggressive philosophy of this defense. Extremely high blitz rate, 40% blitz rate so far. That is really, really high. Their run blitz rate, 49% on rundowns. They're throwing fire zone at you. They try to get TFLs. That is the goal. Get TFLs. Get into second and long, which is essentially just a mandatory passing down at this point. Nobody really runs it on second and long, at least not the offenses that we take seriously. And then, especially if we can get a TFL on second down, put you in 3rd and 7. Okay, now it's max time, right? But the overall aggression of this team, because I was looking at their coverage data and I was like, I thought they were like more of a quarters team. And I saw the cover 3 was super high. And I was like, wait a minute. That's probably 3-3 fire zone. Let me look at the blitz rate. And then I saw 49%. I was like, oh yeah, they just call fire zone all the time. So that's their identity. They're a 15% cover 0 team on 3rd down, which I know doesn't sound like a lot, but for 0, that's a lot. So they blitz and they blitz and they blitz. And there's a few different reasons for that. Number one, if you're blitzing on 3rd down, it's so that you can give your one-on-ones to Max and Wilkins. Because they have to allocate other resources to pick up linebackers and safeties and all that kind of stuff. So you can force one-on-ones that way. B, if you're run blitzing on 1st and 10, what that allows them to do, and this kind of plays into why Max has so many stops, is if you're blitzing, you can force the offensive line to peel off of these combo blocks early because they have to pick up a body that's coming off his back hip or something like that, whether it's a nickel or a linebacker or a safety or whoever. If you can force these combos to break down early before they're really set, before they can really climb, then it's just Max Crosby one-on-one with an advantageous angle. And yeah, he's going to get the stop. So that's kind of their philosophy of, okay, let's be aggressive, not just to be aggressive, but let's be aggressive to make Max Crosby and Christian Wilkins' life easier. And they're doing that. And they're letting this defense kind of funnel through those two guys on the defensive line winning their one-on-ones so that everything gets disrupted. The DBs can play aggressive because they know the quarterback's not going to be living long enough to throw it deep anyway. And just the whole philosophy of this defense, I love it. It's very Raider. It's very, very Raiders, but it's also sustainable. I think they can keep doing this. I don't see a single opponent on their schedule that I don't think they could stifle at least a little bit. They have the talent to do that. And if this defense keeps playing like this, Gardner Minshew or not, they're a tough out. Now, the one thing that I want, offensively speaking, the one thing I want them to get better at is protecting Gardner from getting sacked. He's gotten 10 sacks so far. Part of that is they don't really call a lot of play action. They're a 16% play action rate. So they're basically saying Gardner stand in there and deliver. I don't want him to do that. To be frank, I really don't. Because if Gardner gets pressured like that, eventually he's going to give the ball away. I just want them to protect him from himself. So give me more 7-man pass protections. Give me more play action. Just look at what the Saints are doing and do that. And then just keep letting the defense do their thing. And this could be a 10-win team, truly.
They are going to have to run the ball better. And this is the week if the Raiders are going to get their run game turned around. Carolina's without their best run defender in Derek Brown. The Raiders' rushing attack so far through 2 weeks has been atrocious. There isn't a better way to put it. They're last in rush yards per game at 49, last in rush EPA at negative 0.63. But if there's ever a chance to get your run game rolling, this is the week. Carolina without Derek Brown is the best chance you're going to have to get Zam going downhill, get the yards that you were envisioning in the offseason, and hopefully get that back on track. And that'll help support some of that you're talking about with Gardner, take some load off him. They've been doing it in other creative ways, but I'm with you. If you can keep him out of sort of deep, straight dropbacks where he is reading progressions and being more susceptible to pressure without movement, bad things are going to happen the longer you let that happen.
Well, again, because I'm me, and sometimes I make questionable decisions, even though the Raiders are dead last in terms of yards per carry at 2.5 per carry, I couldn't resist taking White higher than half a touchdown for this week, because I think they're at least going to get there. Like, it's Carolina. I think they're at least going to get in the low red zone. I just need him to score. I don't need him to get 3 yards per carry. I just need him to score. So that rounds out our full entry for underdog this week. Again, it's Zamir White at higher than half a touchdown. It's Josh Jacobs at lower than 14.5 for his longest rush. It's Zay Flower higher at 54.5 receiving. Justin Herbert higher at 199.5 passing, and Alvin Kamara with the not quite a gimme, but pretty darn close, higher than half a touchdown. Now, if there's any one of those you don't like, again, I will encourage you to use your CD Lamb free pick to fill in the gaps, because everybody gets a CD Lamb free pick as of the day this is posted. And if you're new on Underdog, you can still fill in that gap with a Patrick Mahomes half a yard free pick. So, maybe you don't like the Zamir White goal line TD, whatever it is, you can make this entry infinitely better. Again, using promo code bootleg at Underdog Fantasy in the link in the description or at the QR code on the screen, up to $1,000 deposit bonus. How was that for an ad read, EJ? Look at that transition.
I think it was fantastic, and I didn't even have to say, remove the mop handle propping up the scaffolding at your discretion by using the free picks, whichever one you think is the mop handle. And it might be any one of those, given your particular views on the league. But speaking of our views on the league, we got to take a minute to talk about your boy, Bryce. Yes, I know. You knew it was coming.
I know. Here's my thing.
Okay.
He hasn't been good.
Nope.
I'm not going to say he's been adequate. He hasn't been. Like, if we're looking at like EPA per play, this is like historically bad, for the first 18 games of a career. I'm not going to make any excuses for that. He looks small out there. He looks like he doesn't have the talent to be a starting NFL quarterback. But we also kind of knew when he was being drafted, you're not really drafting him for physical talent. You were drafting him for the superpowers he did have, i.e., seeing the field. He was great under pressure. He was great at navigating the pocket. He was accurate. He had great timing. There were so many things that he did exceptionally well. I still go back to that game against Texas in front of 100,000 people. It's blindingly loud. He's got pressure all around him and he's making plays and he's winning that game. It's like that. It's not like that didn't happen. There was great tape out there. The problem is when you have somebody whose confidence gets shattered because the pass protection was awful last year. No receivers could separate. And you shattered what made him good. And then you come into this year. And we like the Dave Canales hire because the work that he had done with Baker Mayfield and the work that he had done with Geno Smith. But then for whatever reason, this organization gave him 12 snaps in the preseason in a new offense in the third week of preseason, no less. And he was going against Buffalo Bills, not just third stringers, but guys who weren't even on the roster. The Bills D-line out there in that drive was Cameron Klein, Deshaun Williams, Eli Ankou, and Casey Toohill. And Toohill's the only one that's on the roster. So it's like, is that good work in the preseason to get this kid ready to play? So it's like, yeah, of course he failed. This is a quarterback who didn't have the physical talent to overcome shitty structure. And unfortunately, he was put in the shittiest structure possible. So what do we expect? I have half a mind to just say, like, trade him to Shanahan to be Brock Purdy's backup, and just let him get his confidence back on the bench for a little while, and maybe do the Sam Darnold thing where like Darnold got in a little bit and looked pretty nice, and then got to deal with Minnesota, and Minnesota is a much better structure, and Darnold looks great now. Former Panthers quarterback, by the way, or Baker Mayfield. Had to go to the Rams and be rehabbed by McVay for a little bit and had a better structure and got his confidence back, and then went to Tampa and had an even better structure with great receivers and Canales, ironically, as his play caller. And he looks great now. Like, just get him away from Carolina. Because I still think there might be something there, but it's not going to happen with the Panthers. It's just not at this point.
I would agree with you on most all of that. And I want to frame the discussion a little bit because I've seen a lot of dunks. I think it's very easy to kick down in situations like this, and lots of people coming out and saying, I told you Bryce was short and he was never going to work, which is never the kind of thing they say when the short quarterback does work, and whatever they said is not valid. There's always a range of outcomes when you talk about a player, from best possible, like lands in the perfect situation. We talk about this every year during draft season, to worst case. And I think it's fair to say that Bryce's outcome so far as a pro is in the bottom 5% of what we predicted as possible. This is the worst of the worst. Like you said, bad landing spot. All the bad things have happened. Basically, everything that could have gone wrong has gone wrong. As far as what's next, I'd love to see him get some work with Canales under less pressure as the backup, but that's not going to happen in this situation. Just like you said, it's not going to occur with the Panthers. What we are seeing looks very much like heavy ownership involvement in the decision, the speed of the poll, Canales' reticence to talk about why, and his conversations with Tepper. All of those things basically point to it ain't going to happen in this situation. Then what? Then what do you do with a guy like Bryce Young, who's on your roster? He's a bit of an albatross. And I think the best thing to do would be to move him, for your team as well. And the best possible fit I could see for him as a QB in the league is in Miami with Mike McDaniel.
Oh, especially if this Tua thing. Yeah.
Right. So here's the thing. It's an out-of-conference trade. There's certainly a need. That need could work out, could become a more long-term need. And we've all talked about Bryce's physical skills this week. You just said he didn't have physical skills to overcome bad situations. If there is one offense in this league that he is custom tailored to be able to run from a physical standpoint, quick decision-making, delivering the ball, to his playmakers accurately, then depending on Yak, that's Miami's thing in a nutshell for the most part. He wouldn't be the starter. They have two other quarterbacks there in Skyler and now Tyler Huntley. He could be the third stringer, right? And they're going to get him for a song. This is an opportunity for Miami to buy as low as they possibly can. This is basically fire sale beyond. Like, oh yeah, I got that burned out building over there. What, you give me $1 for it. Okay, cool. They get him in there. They see if they can rehabilitate his confidence. McDaniel was very good for that with Tua. Tua's spoken very openly about how his confidence was beaten down under his previous leaders and built back up under McDaniel. So if there is a perfect fit in this league for Bryce to see if he has anything left, and I'm not saying that he does, because he is at the deep end right now. He is as down bad as you get as a quarterback in the NFL. If there is one chance, one path forward, the whole Doctor Strange, there's one outcome that could work out for Bryce Young, it is a bargain basement trade to Miami where he has no pressure. Everybody kind of forgets about him. He gets to work with Mike McDaniel, and we see what happens if he gets a chance to play. Then we'd probably have a good picture of whether or not this was an NFL quarterback. But until something like that occurs, or short of that, I'm not sure that we ever will. And that is unfortunate.
The narratives about Bryce remind me a lot of the narratives about Tua, a few years ago. Right? Where it's like, oh, he doesn't have the arm. He doesn't have the physical talent. He's not super mobile. He's small. What is he good at? Okay, timing, touch, anticipation, all that stuff, right? And then he gets a coach in McDaniel that emphasizes that, and he's great. So, yeah, that absolutely makes sense. And I think I think because of the Tua, concussion, where he's out at least 4 games, like it does kind of make sense for them to either A, if Tua comes back, have a backup that has a similar skill set, or B, if Tua, doesn't come back and he decides to hang him up, like you have another potential cheap, talented quarterback, at least talented in the ways that matter for this offense. I love that trade. Like, I absolutely think that makes sense. And I kind of hope it happens now because it would be good for Bryce. And I just want Bryce to be in a good situation.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it would be the best possible outcome of what has been so far a terrible, again, worst case scenario situation for a top pick coming into the NFL. And we're fans of football. You know that if you watch this podcast. If you follow this, we want to see guys succeed. Obviously, not all of them will, but it feels like the deck was pretty stacked against Bryce's success. And he certainly didn't get what we would consider his best chance at being his best self as a player in the NFL. And if he could get that on the second go around, it would be a fantastic story and we'd all get to see some more good football. So who doesn't love that?
All right. Well, on that note, it's time for us to get out of here. Hope you guys enjoyed our week 3 preview. Remember, we have our week 3 recap coming on Monday afternoon-ish, probably afternoon-ish. After all the week 3 games are concluded. I think it is a Monday night doubleheader this week. So there's 2 games that we're not going to be talking about for sure in that recap, but we'll hit them in our TNF live stream for the week 4. What day is this? Is going on Friday? Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. There's more to come. How about that? I want to thank all of our executive producers for Bootleg Football on our Bootleg Patreon. Andrew, Connor, Icon, Liam, and Mike. Once again, appreciate all of you for making this possible. Appreciate our clothing partner, Homage. I believe EJ is wearing an Homage Saints shirt right now to pay his respects to the Saints offensive line. And election year Derek Carr, which is an entirely different version of Derek Carr, as we've come to understand. All right. If you want to find any NFL clothing for your favorite team, you can go to Homage at the QR code on the screen or at the link in the description, or anything else you can get on Homage, whether it's college football clothing or bootleg clothing or 80s niche television show clothing. Whatever you get at those links, we get a cut of it. So it's a great way to indirectly support the show. That's all I think we have for you today. Come by soon-ish for more. And until then, later.